Hi everyone, welcome to the fourth in the series of Elevating Digital Teams by BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. Today's session is session number 4 and the last in the regular part of the series, and we're focused today on retaining talent, creating clear career progression paths. Once again, I'm your host, Ashley Larkin, BCS Key Account Manager, and I'm joined by Andrew Barnett. I'll just let him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Andrew. I'm one of the technical consultants at BCS. What that effectively means is I work with organizations who are trying to engage and develop their people, and typically we'll be using frameworks to do that. But I'm very pleased to meet you all today and hope you get some benefit out of this relatively short session.
And I'm one of the key account managers here, which essentially means I look after some of our organizational partners who use RoleModelplus, which is a system we'll be showing to you later and have been showing throughout the webinar series. I work with all different clients from all different sizes. If you wish to know more, my email and Andrew's are on the screen. They'll also be on at the end. So today's session, we're focused very much on the ideas of and the importance of retaining talent. I think the challenge is quite obvious about retaining talent, that without, as it says on the screen, visible career growth opportunities, organization risk losing valuable employees. Because, and me and Andrew were talking about this earlier, there's a couple of ways that organizations can retain talent, one of which is financially, and often that isn't possible. We work with lots of different clients, public sector, universities, government sections, which potentially don't have the opportunities to provide sort of that financial benefit for their staff. So the other thing that you can do is providing career growth opportunities. So today what we'll cover is how, by providing a career pathway, you can help retain staff, increase engagement, and support internal mobility. And this is all going to be around benchmarking career pathways. So, Andrew, we spoke about this a little earlier in preparation for today's session. Why are some of the reasons you think organizations come to us in and look at building career pathways into their organizations in general?
Yeah, we did talk about it, and you alluded to it. We work with a lot of central government organizations, those that can't throw money at the situation, if we can put it that way. So they need to highlight, as we're going to talk about today, other opportunities based on, people's current skill set. So, which is a valuable thing to try and achieve. For those other things that they have to bring into the equation, again, thinking about government, is what their ambitions are as an organization, what their North Star is. So they try and appeal to that nature as well, and steer the conversation away from the financial reward. So there are lots of things, and again, it's quite challenging to, we'll highlight as many as we can today, but the career pathway piece, that's a phrase we use. It's really all about people understanding how dynamic they can be based on, skills that have been benchmarked against within their current role. So hopefully that sort of expands a little bit, but that's why they come to us. They want to stem the flow of people leaving their organization. They also want to be seen as an organization that is put a lot of consideration into, if you come to work with us, we are going to make sure that all opportunities are highlighted to you. And I think that's also a very valuable message. That's why they keep coming back to us anyway, I would like to suggest. But over to you, Ashley.
I couldn't agree with more with you. I think we had a really that interesting discussion earlier that, you can't chuck money at everything. And I think certainly for my demographic and younger, the IT careers can often be quite transient, and individuals are always looking for what they can get out of an organization before moving on. And by offering real clear and obvious career pathways, and we'll talk about it a little later, or at least a structure around what a career pathway can look like, an understanding of what progression looks like in that organization is really important. And if you underpin that, as on the screen shows, benchmarked career pathways, which again taps into the use of frameworks, which we've talked quite a lot about, But we're a big fan of using an industry standard or a framework, which has been a consistent theme throughout this series. So just to recap, some of the frameworks that we talk about, and the framework we're going to be talking about today specifically, and have been throughout, is of course SFIA, the skills framework for the information age. And then the granulated version. So this slide is just sort of, and you've probably seen it in every issue of this webinar series. And if you haven't, we will send you the full recordings of the previous 3 sessions that were focusing on the initial building of job role using the SFIA framework, to benchmarking from an individual point of view, what that benchmarking process looks like, which we'll touch a little bit on some more today. And then the last session, which Andrew will try and sort of complete a little bit, because I think some of it was left unfinished, focus around the career planning aspect of it, workforce planning aspect of it. And then today is obviously focused around the individual experience. So Andrew will touch upon that when he shows you the system. But why we use SFIA and what SFIA is it's the skills framework for the information age, and it provides ubiquity around describing a job role within the industry. I don't want to touch too much on it because I'm very much aware of repeating ourselves, but we use a granulated version of the SFIA framework called SFIAplus, which breaks down the broader statements, breaks it down into manageable elements such as work activities, behavioural skills, knowledge and skills, qualifications, and then when benchmarking against it, it's a lot more granular. But again, we did cover that in a previous session, but I think it's important to recap that. And again, just to recap, Andrew, what do you think the importance is around using an industry standard or a framework in your experience with working with clients?
Again, we seem a little partisan when we talk about SFIA, but often organizations come to us and they've been trying to tussle with SFIA. So they've independently concluded that it is a perspective on industry. They'll lose it in large or small portions. But our point is, if you can use elements of it and to a greater or lesser extent than what we've been discussing, particularly today, becomes a lot more achievable, i.e. those helping people understand where else in the IT digital profession they could lend themselves. It also, that individual may, after all your efforts, may still choose to move on. But what you've done in that meantime is you shared with them some industry perspective on things, and that is a theme that we always talk about. It's not always easy to talk about it, but it's a reality of the situation. And another one that sprang to mind when I spoke earlier is around also building confidence in people. So people don't really, some on occasion, people don't fully appreciate the impact and the capabilities that they have, but holding it up or holding a mirror or SFIA as a mirror to them to say, look, you are capable of many things, is also something else we were able to make headway into as well. So there's lots of upside. And another, just finally on the slide that Ashley's sharing with us today, although this is, yes, it's a more granular version of the SFIA framework which we maintain, it also suggests that, or we kept it in to say that there are lots of things to consider when crafting a role. That's often the approach organizations take. And if you look at some of the things highlighted there are also things it gives you a chance to pull together everything to do with these endeavors around developing people, helping people move in organization. So you can weave into that any learning and development you've designed, any career pathways, any communities of practice that exist to support people in their current role and internal moves as well. And it's really important in people's busy days to encapsulate that all within one role profile. So again, it's something that we pick up on and have designed and responded to with organizations we work with. So yeah, I am a big fan of that framework, but also others as well. An example we'll look at will show how we weave these things together.
And I think it's important as part of today and going forward is when we're talking about career pathways, we're talking about career pathways in relation to benchmarking, because there's no reason why an organization can't. Well, you will have an organization structure and that would look like a career pathway, but what brings that to life, and it's something we spoke about previously, is the element of benchmarking against the role and then seeing how you match against that sort of broader career tree or career highway. I've heard lots of people describe it in different ways, but that's what really brings it to life and sort of takes us on to the next part of today. And the bulk of today, where we're going to look once again at the system. Andrew's going to pick up where we left the last session. So again, if you didn't manage to join the last session, we will send you the full recordings of the last 3 sessions so that you can catch up. So I'm just going to hand over to you, Andrew, if you can take us through the system and pick up where you left off, and then beautifully segue into the career pathways piece.
Thanks, Ashley. I'll do my best. So also what we can do, and where we left off last time, we were telling the story of an individual who has a role, who's done everything he can in the role, and he's probably looking for opportunities, which that person knows. Using systems is useful because you can get ahead of that a little bit. And so what we were doing, we were looking at some of the reporting. So when you build a role using frameworks, I'll build a role for a project manager, use various appropriate skills at a level where benchmark will happen. That person's away on their journey for development with their manager and support. I'll do the same for a solutions architect role. I'll select, identify appropriate skills and do the same thing. But by benchmarking over in my current role, I'm leaving traces of myself or my capability on all the other roles. And that's why we stress the usefulness of considering to use frameworks, is because the structure lends themselves to achieving that aim. But for someone in a workforce planning, where we left off last time, we were looking at we were targeting particular roles, and we were looking at, because it's quite straightforward to understand where your skills gaps are. That's why you'll always identify them, particularly if you've done this for the first time or using a more granular version. And so that's why it's important to get ahead of that, because people will participate and then they'll say, well, what next? So to consider any and all learning that you have at your disposal that's connected to a role or role pathway or role family. Again, that's why we purposely mentioned weaving it into that, so I can draw from that at an appropriate point in time, which we'll talk about in a second. But so we can also see, we built a role using skills at an appropriate level. I've the story is I've benchmarked against a role, and someone in the back end, someone with a workforce planning focus, can look at the data and say, well, within this project management team, there are 3 people in post. There's a 40% overskilling. So somewhere along the process, an individual said, I can see what you're asking me to do in terms of the skills. I'm actually overperforming that, and my manager has agreed with me. So I can identify Andrew here, who's overskilled. So one could suggest that Andrew might be looking for opportunities. Now, that is often not an uncommon scenario, but there are others, but that's one. And so we want for Andrew to understand that there are other opportunities within the organization before he starts, looking elsewhere, let's say. And that is, again, I can't stress that is such a common scenario, particularly in government, and interestingly in the police force as well, which we happen to work with quite a lot at the moment. So going to Andrew's gaze, to the point of today's presentation, is how can we help this individual understand, because we've used consistent ways of describing skills from frameworks, and he's done a benchmark, it's been ratified by the manager, so he's off and away with his own personal professional development against that role. We want to be able to highlight, there's 2 things we'll look at today: career pathways. So if an organization can choose to structure a certain progression path for people, however they choose to do that, or highlight a particular project, whatever. But organization, again, sharing what we have responded to and what organizations like best, is not necessarily that structured pathway, but just the simple fact that because we use frameworks and because there are commonalities between the skills selected for role A, in this case project management, and all the other roles, we're just simply going to highlight this to people, and that's what's seen as most valuable. So if I get to the point, I've logged into the system. I have a project management role which has various skills which have been ratified. I'm working on that. I've actually stated, as I said, I'm overskilled. So the system's simply saying, based on what we already know about you, your validated skills against your role or other frameworks, that there's a particular role here. I've already flagged as a favorite, just my Blue Peter moment. We rehearsed it already. as an architect role, it actually, for those people in government sectors on the call, it's a blended role. So it's using the government digital and data taxonomy and SFIA, just it happens to do both. But what I'm going to do is, and that is often where organizations simply, that's what they simply want to achieve, a purpose-built environment to just signpost these roles that are a match. I could order that by role family, but it's just we've said 72% match, so that's close enough to be in consideration. And this is really where I'm hoping people have sort of understood this concept of you build a role using a selection of skills. So this role is straight from the Cabinet Office, actually. So the role composition is predetermined, but this particular role, architect, associate business architect, comprises of these skills at these levels, and the system already knows that skills I've benchmarked elsewhere, how they apply to this role. And I won't go into the calculation, but it's led me to this point. And if I so choose, I can continue to benchmark against that specific role, add a second development plan, and so on and so forth. But one thing I want to just get across before I look at the structure pathways, in a fairly crude way, I might add, I've literally taken something of our membership experience as a piece of micro learning and embedded it in the role. The thinking being, if I am interested in that role, I want to know about all the learning that's available, everything this organization has to offer, that if I choose to go down this route, technically a sideways step, what can I bring into my development plan to support me in that journey? And that could be anything. And a lot of organizations will map entire learning journeys, often using LMS systems, to roles. And we could talk about that all day long and some of the challenges, but it gives you the opportunity to pull it all together. If I clicked on this button here, I'd spear off to another system through single sign-on, which I'm not going to do. But again, we're trying to be efficient with people's time. And finally, actually, if we just quickly look at the same principles. So because we've used frameworks or consistent ways of describing things, there's a number of frameworks here. Often organizations will use this to describe organization personas. So maybe they're a consultancy firm working with organization X. They want to describe the roles. But this is another one we've just drawn up. Again, for any, I'll flip it around the other way. So this is my role here. I'm already in this tier of practitioner, but we've clustered together similar roles of similar levels of seniority and presented it that way, but it's completely free format. You can do what you like. And if I clicked on this button here, I'd see all the learning associated with a particular step. So again, we're simply just, that's one of the values, one of the advantages of using frameworks. Back to you, Ashley. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, I think that this is a really good illustration. If you want to just bring that back up quickly before I jump back to my presentation, because we're wrapping up quickly because time gets away from you. This is a really good illustration of visually what it looks like to use a framework, to build a role out of that framework. That's one of the real tangible pieces you can get from an individual. We spoke about how IT can be quite a transient career, is not just the vertical progression pathways you see, but the commonality of skills across different job families, I think, is really potent. We spoke earlier about we spoke about hypothetically about a service desk engineer or someone joining an organization at the very, very junior level. In most other careers outside of IT, digital computing, whatever you want to call it, there would be a very obvious, let's say I'm a barrister, I'd join as a apprentice and end up as a partner, and it's a very much linear progression pathway. It's, you reach certain criteria and goals and you grow up the career pathway. But within our profession, there's so many different facets and sort of sub areas part of that. Understanding that's part of your initial learning journey within the organization that you work in is really helpful. So I'm a service desk engineer. What's it mean to become a software developer? What's it mean to become a business analyst? And I can visually see in the progress of doing these consistent benchmarking, which sort of ties in everything we spoke around using frameworks and having that commonality and consistency around language, provides that real visual clarity of, okay, I'm here, here's how I get here. Maybe I'm going to go right, maybe I'm going to go left. And I think when speaking with organizations, this is something that can, whilst providing sort of tangible benefits to an individual, it creates a culture that is around professional development. We are in a situation, certainly lots of the clients I work with, and I know the same with you, Andrew, is that retaining talent and developing talent is really hard because there are currently more jobs than people in certain sectors, certainly. So by being able to offer a longevity to an individual through a career pathway, through benchmarking against the role, through all the stuff we talked about in this series, I think really, hopefully, brings some of that stuff to life. I don't know if you want to sort of touch upon anything else, Andrew, before we segue back.
No, that's you know, we talk about this at length, and it is challenging to squeeze it into a session. But the bits for me, again, always thinking about the individual, and is you know, being mindful of how the various skills ebb and flow and evolve over time, whether that's using the government frameworks or SFIA, whatever, but being able to weave it into people's day job, and just to encourage people to be mindful of good practices, let's use that phrase, it is another valuable step forward, another means to engage. And what we can see, because we use systems often, is people do engage. And the more people engage, the more data we have, the more insight, the more informed organizations could be about what they need to do in the future, how they structure their development, recruitment, etc. It's you know, it's very compelling. So it's a juggling act of gathering data, using good practices, using the right language with people and organizations. We're very, very careful with that as well. And being a professional body, it's sometimes quite convenient. But what we've been talking about the last few sessions is really providing evidence to staff members that we're saying we're going to do it, and we can quite clearly illustrate, based on you participating in self-development, that there are, in this case, other opportunities available for you. And I can't stress enough the importance to think about all the learning that you have. It doesn't have to be paid for. It could be a community of practice, could be a body of learning you've designed, could be something on your internet. Pull it all together and weave that into the roles as well, because it's really, really quite critical, and another, you know, means for people to continue to engage with this. But yeah, I'll finish it off there. But hopefully that's been of use, and we're more than happy to talk. And finally, a final word: every organization is different. We don't mean to say this is exactly how you should do it. We're just trying to suggest things to be mindful and going to research. I am clearly a big fan of frameworks because I know what can be achieved when you use them, but they need to be positioned and used with kind of caution, and you know, with thought. But I'll leave it there, Ashley. But thank you for the opportunity.
No, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of all organizations being different and the million different ways to apply frameworks and building roles and benchmarking and career pathways. And we've had limited time on each session, so you know, the possibilities really are endless. Just to sort of segue neatly back to the next session. So this is, as we mentioned, the last specific session around SFIAplus benchmarking. We do have a bonus session for all of those who work in health and care, that will be run by two separate people. So it's the last session from us. That is next Tuesday, same time. So if there is anyone on the call who is specifically focused around health and care and informaticians, then that session will really bring some of that stuff to life. So I guess.
Sorry, I should interrupt. There is a question Cara highlighted, and it's from TJ. Who would usually fill in the percentage gap, the employers or the managers? In our system, it's this environment that we've created is used to sort of frame, if you will, that staff manager conversation. Typically, the individual will do the benchmark first, and that's achievable going back to some of the granularity that we have at our disposal, because the way we're describing certain skills, it's really quite unambiguous. So they can read the definition of a skill and either say, yes, I'm doing that. If not, suggests a gap, and they'll say there is a gap, or add to my development list. Or they could say, oh, I'm performing at a high level skill or a low level skill. So they make their statement or make their position known within the environment, and then that's ratified by the manager, who could overturn that make suggestions as to why they may have chosen to do that. So in the first instance, it's the individual. They are able to do that because of the level of detail, but it doesn't. What you can also do is weave into the benchmarking process some, third-party diagnostics. If it's quite a technical role, you could do that as well. But that, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole just yet. But it's initially the person ratified by the manager or a subject matter expert you can float in. And so hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, hopefully that does. I think it's tough to answer this because I think some of these questions might be answered by previous sessions, but I think that you did a fine job of answering that. Okay. We still have a few more minutes left, so we're happy to take any more questions. So we'll give you a minute if there's anything you specifically want to ask. I don't know if you think, while people are sort of thinking about any potential questions, if you think we potentially missed anything. I guess a lot of what we've spoken about is that the process of building roles, benchmarking against roles, using workforce planning, and then providing career pathways for individuals has been covered as part of our series. But is there any final nugget you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I always think about them when we close, but I'll try and rack my brains now. What I will say, and I think it's testament to hopefully our effectiveness on the ground, is again, we wouldn't advertise this, but often we get asked to introduce or our clients volunteer to speak to other organizations about how they've made a dent in some of the challenges we've sort of laid out over the past few sessions. I think that's quite telling. So we'll give our opinions, as you've seen, but I think there's nothing that it can't replace an organization who are in the thick of it and said, okay, we've adapted this version of, BCS's solution, for want of a better word. So that's quite telling. And again, it's typical of a professional body. We have communities of people. We have a community of organizations who we're helping with these challenges. And again, they're probably happy to speak to organizations at some point in your journey. But there's something else I'll think about later, but that's all I can think of at the top of my head right now, Ashley.
I think that brings neatly on to if you do want to speak to some of our clients who have been through this experience or talk to us, because we've touched upon some of the key themes and ideas of what you can look to do, but we're always open to discussions. I believe we're having some discussions with people who've attended previous webinars. Our emails are on the screen. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, same with Andrew, and we'll be happy there to support you. But I don't believe there are any further questions. So if there aren't, spot on time with 1 second to go, then we'll call that a day. So thank you everyone so much for attending. I hope we provided some value and understanding. And I can see a few comments saying that they missed previous sessions. We'll be in touch, or just drop us an email and we'll be able to send you those recordings. But thank you for coming to this one. I know if this is the only one you've attended, it's probably a little confusing because you're joining at the end. But we'll send you all the recording from the other sessions. But if you would like just to have a conversation with us, please drop me or Andrew an email and we'll get in touch. But thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and
thank you.
Hopefully speak to you all soon. Thank you, Andrew, again. I think it's been a wonderful
Thanks, Ashley.
session.
Cheers. And thanks, Cara. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time.